Speaker.
Welcome to the Pyrenees Shire Council Ordinary Meeting for Tuesday the 15th of June 2021. As the meeting chair, I give my consent for this open council meeting to be streamed live, recorded and published online. Anyone who is invited to read out a question or a presentation will be recorded, and their voice, image and comments will form part of the live stream and recording. The Chair and or the CEO have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content of debate is considered misleading, defamatory or potentially inappropriate to be published. The stream will stop prior to the closed section of the meeting and will recommence for the conclusion of the meeting. The public is able to view this live stream via our website at www.pyrenees.vic.gov.au. Should technical issues prevent the continuation of the stream, a recording will be made available on our website. The opening prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask you to give your blessing to this council, direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of the Pyrenees Shire. Amen. We acknowledge the people past and present of the Wadawurrung, Jar Jar Wurrung, Eastern Maar and Watchabollock tribes whose land forms the Pyrenees Shire. We pay our respects to the customs, traditions and stewardship of the land by the elders and people of those tribes on whose land we meet today. Call for any apologies? No apologies. Any items, any notice of disclosure of interest by any councils? Councillor Clark.
Mr Chairman, thank you. And item 13.4.1, which is the Western Victorian Transmission Network, just for the meeting to note that I am a landholder that is affected by that project, which I hold in common with others, so I won't have to leave the chamber, but just to declare that for the record.
Thank you for declaring that, Councillor Clark. Item 7, the confirmation of the previous minutes. Can have some, have we all had a chance to have a look at those minutes? And if the Chair quick can have someone move. Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Easton, all those in favour? Thank you. Item 8, business arising. There was no business arising from the previous meeting held on the 18th of May 2021. Public participation. Members of the public are encouraged to ask questions of council at ordinary council meetings. Members of the public are unable to attend this meeting in person but can participate in question time by submitting their questions in writing either online, through council's website or by mail or hand delivered. A person can ask a maximum of 2 questions at any one meeting on any topic, and the questions and responses shall not exceed 5 minutes. Questions that are received by 12 noon on the day of the meeting. Questions are read by the chairperson during public participation. The chairperson or councillor or council officer to whom a question is referred may immediately answer the question or take the question on notice for the next ordinary meeting. We have a number of questions here to get through, and a lot of them relate to the Western Victorian Transmission Network project. So I'll just call that the project for ease of getting through on time. So the first question is from Anthony Brodie of Lexton. With regard to the project, has council considered the environmental impact from the removal of trees of significant age and vegetation and the knock-on effect to protected and endangered species? Also, the likely erosion felt from the impact of land clearing along the corridor with the removal of large stumps and vegetation. Mr Nolan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I thank Mr Brodie for his question. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr Brodie, for your question. The potential environmental impacts of the project are to be fully evaluated through the environmental effects statement process. This includes potential impacts to vegetation, including large old trees and listed species. There will be a biodiversity technical report and other specialty studies on geology and geomorphology which inform the EES. The fieldwork for these studies has commenced by specialists engaged by AusNet Services. The outcomes of these studies and the reports will be shared with the public.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. A second question from Anthony Brodie. If a 500 kV transmission line is given the go-ahead, the towers will dominate the landscape and impact households and farming practices both under the line and in the area. The area was described by Major Mitchell as the Valley of the finest description, and the power lines will devastate the scenic beauty of the Pyrenees Ranges now and into the future for all residents and tourists. Has the council considered the impact on rateable valuations and attracting new residents and tourists to the area and the ability of the council to generate income? Who would want to live under them anyway? Mr Nolan.
Thank you again, Mr Brodie, for this question. As we know, transmission lines occur across the Victorian landscape. Transmission lines are present in communities with farming and tourism industry activities. Residents are not permitted under high voltage transmission lines, and the proponent, AusNet Services, will be assessing the potential impacts on visual amenity during the preparation of the EES. Council will consider the impacts as outlined by Mr Brodie when the technical impact assessment work is completed, including the visual impact and the impact on tourism, impact on valuation of land and economic growth. So individuals and the community feedback is into the input and input into the project is very welcome. And there will be multiple opportunities for the community to be engaged through this process, where a number of those impacts that have been outlined by the community members have been brought to Council's attention.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. Got some questions from Katrina Lee of Lexton in relation to the project. With regard to the project, who is the council representative on the technical reference group, and what input has been provided to the TRG on behalf of the council and from the TRG via the representative to the council? Mr Nolan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Katrina Lee for your question. The Manager for Planning and Development, Katie Gleisner, is Pyrenees Shire Council representative on the TRG. The TRG is responsible for reviewing the technical reports and components of the EES as they are prepared. A more comprehensive description of the role of the TRG is outlined in the scoping document that was endorsed by the Minister. The terms of reference for the TRG prevent TRG members from sharing the technical impact information with the public, and that is the role of AusNet Services as the proponent.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. A second question from Katrina Lee. The impact of a second 220 kV line is significant with regard to the proposed route in respect to landowners, the environment, firefighting. Consider the impact on the Lexton Bend major fire with that current line would have had, as well as property values. It is acknowledged by council that a 500 kV line will have a greater impact in the report submitted at the last council meeting. Will council be supporting a change to the corridor either along the Western Freeway or underground? Mr Nolan.
Sorry, councillors, I'm having a little bit of difficulty turning on the mic. So again, I'll just repeat that for the benefit of the community. I thank Katrina Lee again for this question. The impacts associated with both 220 kV and 500 kV transmission lines will be determined through the EES process. The report to the council meeting to be considered by council later this evening does quote a section out of the scoping document in respect of the proposed overhead transmission line, which will require a lattice of towers spaced at intervals of approximately 450 to 500 metres. Towers will be 40 to 60 metre high for the 220 kV line and 60 to 80 metres high for a 500 kV section. The proponent will seek to acquire an easement in which to build the operate the project, and the easement will typically be 40 metres to 60 metres wide for a 220 kV line and 70 to 100 metres wide for a 500 kV section of the project. Undergrounding is an option that is, I understand, being considered as part of the EES process. And along with above, underground, and the option of no power lines at all options being considered as part of the EES.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Just for the benefit of the people watching, we are trialling a new audio system tonight. So if we have a few little hiccups, please bear with us, but we'll get there.
Mr. Mayor, if I might just add to that question, the answer to that question. Council has not yet determined its position in respect of the corridor or in respect of the underground. And there is a report to the council meeting tonight for council to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Some questions here from Matthew Brody of Lexton. Question 1. Sir John Monash pioneered a dream to supply Melbourne with electricity for the masses by using poles and wires. 100 years later, we are now looking to supply Melbourne with the greenest, cleanest, most up-to-date means of power generation that today's technology can provide. However, this proposed 500 kV line completely contradicts and ignores these fundamental ideologies by destroying upwards of 100 acres of pristine native bushland within the Pyrenees Shire, consisting of highly significant flora and fauna that will be cut down and grubbed out. How can an environmentally responsible Shire support such an irrational project? Mr. Nolan.
I thank Mr. Matthew Brody for his question. As I've previously mentioned, the scope for the environmental effect statement is consider all impacts, including those as outlined by Mr. Brody. And council is yet to consider its position in respect of these. However, council has previously advocated on behalf of the community and will seek to inform itself around these impacts before making a submission in respect of the issues outlined by Mr. Brody.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. A second question from Matthew Brody. In financial terms, the compensation offered by AusNet will be entirely inadequate to cover the devaluation and use of the land. Restrictions to agricultural practices are highly unacceptable, with any tractors, headers, trucks, field bins, augers greater than 3 metres being prohibited from being used under or adjacent to the lines. Underground water bores, piping and associated maintenance and access for drilling, crane machines also prohibited. The majority of our land can only be accessed by driving under these lines. If we are prohibited from doing so, we simply cannot farm and improve a large portion of our ground. The Shire surely has a responsibility to look after its residents from such unfair and unreasonable impacts to agricultural practices? Will it support affected landowners during the project with serious Shire time and resources? Mr Nolan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Pyrenees Shire Council acknowledges the importance of agricultural land and the agricultural sector to the economy of this shire. Council also appreciates the importance for farmers to be able to undertake their agricultural practices without undue or unnecessary impacts. The environmental effects statement, as I've mentioned earlier, will consider the range of impacts associated with any transmission lines that are being considered as part of this project. And Council does advocate on behalf of its community and will continue to advocate on behalf of its community in these respects. And when the EES documentation is placed on public exhibition, Council will be allocating appropriate resources to make a comprehensive response on behalf of its community, having regard to the range of issues that the community have raised with us and the technical work that is contained within the EES.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. I have a couple of questions here from Samantha Vella of Lexington. Community members expressed concern in regards to the proposed transmission line expected to run through properties in the Lexington community. These have included bushfire risk with the Ben Major fire only 18 months ago, the impact on the environment, visual enjoyment of land and impact on agricultural use. Will the Pyrenees Shire be joining forces with other councils to ensure it supports its community's wishes of pushing for these lines to be underground and using public easements? Mr Nolan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Samantha Vella for your question. Council does network with other councils in our region on a range of matters, including on this matter, and will continue to do so. Pyrenees Shire Council is yet to formalise its position in respect of the matter of underground and also in respect of the corridor. And there is a report for Council to consider later this evening.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. A second question from Samantha Vella. AusNet has failed to connect with members of the community, and if they have, it has been extremely insufficient with very limited questions answered. How will Council ensure they are actively engaging with the community in relation to the transmission project? Mr Nolan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Samantha Vella for your question, your second question. The project at the moment is in the early stages of the preparation of an EES and approval process. AusNet Services acknowledges that as yet they do not have all the answers to the questions when those questions are put to them, and certainly Council doesn't have all the answers to those questions either. The work in conducting the technical studies must be done in a rigorous and thorough manner before those answers are able to be provided, and a proper and comprehensive understanding of the potential impacts and how the community will be affected. The consultation plan that the proponent has put forward is available, Mr Mayor, on the project website, and that consultation plan does outline a number of methods by which the community have available to them to have input over the coming months. And those, as I'm just reading from page 21 of the consultation plan, so between 2021 and mid-2022, some of the range of consultation options include an updates been provided. Online question portal, interactive online mapping tool, online community question and answer sessions, targeted meetings and workshops. So, Mr Mayor, this is the commitment that the proponent has provided to the community about its engagement, and Council will be doing its best to hold the proponent to account in respect of ensuring that those range of consultation methods are made available over the coming months.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. Two more questions here from Ben Brody of Lexton. First question, recent events like the 6 500 kV transmission towers collapsing at Cressy and horrific consequences that power lines caused on Black Saturday are among valuable lessons that should not be ignored. Private lead-in electrical lines to businesses and homes are now required by legislation to be put underground to eliminate fire risk and risk of electrocution. Do the Pyrenees Shire realise the danger that overhead 500 kV power lines would pose to local communities and in regards to personal safety and fire risk? Mr Nolan.
I thank Mr Ben Brody for his question and those insightful comments that have been made in his statement. And Council will ensure that these comments provided by the community are made available to AusNet services so that these matters can be considered as part of the EES process. From the outset, however, it's clear to understand that Council is not the authority or any expertise necessarily on power lines, and the EES is the place for those impacts to properly be considered.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. And second question from Ben Brody. Firefighting efforts are severely restricted when near transmission lines as the electricity can arc through the smoke to the ground. There are multiple restrictions in regards to aerial firefighting where helicopters and planes are pushed to their limits to avoid collision. These factors mean that firefighting efforts near transmission lines are severely hampered and the defence of a nearby town like Lexton becomes a very difficult task. In light of the recent Ben Major fire at Lexton, wouldn't it be a prudent idea to keep these firefighting obstacles to a minimum? Thank you, Mr Nolan.
Again, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Ben Brody again for your comments and observations. And again, I repeat that those comments will be made available, will be provided to AusNet services, and Council appreciates the potential for these sorts of impacts. These and many others that are perhaps unintended and not well known to Council currently, and as I repeat that the environmental effects statement will consider these impacts as well as the mitigation and the management options available.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. I have a quick couple of questions from Sammy Beaton of Beaufort. First question is, how is 23 Neil Street, Beaufort, an old service station, allowed to serve food on the premises that has contaminated soil? Mr Gowans.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Ms Beaton, for your question. The site in question, although it may have contaminated soil, is not considered a sensitive use from a food premises point of view, as the food is not actually prepared with any contact to the soil. Food is being prepared in a kitchen that complies with food safety regulations.
Thank you, Mr Gowns. And I've got a second question from Sammy Beaton. How can Pops Place at Survey 23 be registered as a food class 2 but not have a registered kitchen on site, make food from home and sell it to the general public in a cafe that's based on contaminated soil? And why are council not doing anything about this? And why are council not returning phone calls? What is it the council are hiding? Mr Gowns.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and again, thank you, Ms Beaton, for your subsequent question. In relation to food being prepared from a secondary kitchen, and in relation to this site, as I stated earlier, the food is being prepared in a kitchen that complies with food safety regulations. However, there are restrictions within the permit due to the capacity of that kitchen. And in general, a home registered business can prepare food as long as it's a registered business for a commercial premises. And just in relation to the final comments, council, I'm not aware that council isn't returning phone calls, and council is not hiding anything. There are sensitive issues here when we are talking about third parties that should be considered, though.
Thank you, Mr Gowns. I have a question online that's basically, it's 8-part question, so I'll read some of it out, and it's from Linda Hell of Carnham. Hello, I wish to voice my upset in being advised that I'm required to pay an extra $250 towards rubbish collection without your proper consultation. I have the following issues and hope that these matters are raised at your next council meeting, and there's a range of 8 dot points, which essentially is 8 additional questions. I honestly believe this is purely a money grab from you. I am really disappointed in the manner this has been handled, and I'm extremely unhappy being expected to pay an extra amount for wastage when I get absolutely nothing more for it. Please advise when next council meeting will be heard and confirm that this will be raised at the next council meeting. Mr Gowan, would you like to speak on that, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Ms Howell, for your question. It is obviously a very detailed question, and typically we would answer these kind of questions on a case-by-case individual basis. But because it has been asked to be raised at the council meeting, I'd just like to make a few points relating to the waste service that is changing. Council has responded to the state circular economic policy that was delivered in 2020, in that the new policy involved the plan for a 4-bin system to be introduced statewide. Funding was prepared to councils to prepare a transition plan to move their service in line with state policy. And council undertook a survey of its residents regarding aspects of this service. Council received 173 responses, which is a good response by many standards that council receives survey response findings. And these survey findings were reported to the council meeting in February 2021. And council considered and endorsed a transition plan at that council meeting. Council also considered the draft 2021 budget, which was endorsed by council at the April council meeting, containing service charges incorporating a universal bin service. Council gave public notice of the draft budget and invited submissions in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. A summary of the draft budget was sent by mail to all residents, advising of where they could obtain more information and how they could make a submission. In addition, a letter was sent to all residents advising of the proposed changes to the waste service, along with a waste flyer. Additional information was prepared, including frequently asked questions to assist people who had queries about the service, and are available on our website. And the matter has been included in a number of our notice boards and news articles in the Pyrenees Advocate and the Maryborough Advertiser. any resident opposed to the service charge can make a submission to the draft budget, and that period for the draft budget has now closed. I am happy to answer this question in writing because there are multiple points to it, but I just wanted to provide that background to the new waste service that includes a glass service, which is a new service on top of our recycling and landfill services, and the green waste service that's still available.
Thank you, Mr Gowns, and thank you, Linda, for your question in relation to that, and you'll receive a more detailed response into each of those dot points in due course. And I'd like to thank all of the people who have submitted questions today, and particularly in relation to the transmission line. I think one thing that's evident to us all is that you're passionate about the land and you're passionate about some outcomes, so which is, I think, a very pleasing thing. In closing off the public participation time, I have a submission to the Pyrenees Shire Council, which is in relation to the Western Victorian Transmission Network project. So I'll work through that. There's a little bit in it, but it is a submission nonetheless. As affected landowners and farmers of 4 generations, it has come to attention in the past months that the Pyrenees Shire Council has not yet formed a position on the transmission project. This submission on behalf of growing numbers of concerned residents strongly advocate that the council promptly follows the position and recommendations by the Ballarat, Hepburn and Moorabool Shires to submit to AEMO and AusNet that the transmission lines, where possible, should be placed underground and along existing easements or highways. It is also our belief that the Shires should allocate serious time and consideration into the negative impacts that this project will have on local residents, farmers, landowners, the lack of professionalism presented by AusNet, devaluation of land, restrictions, mental health, safety and fire risk, and the impact to the environment. In regards to the rollout of this project, AusNet have been very unprofessional, conveying misinformation and coercion in order to get landowners to sign up to land access contracts. Initially, we were informed that the line would most definitely be 220 kV, a mirror of the existing line. Now we are being told that the line will be upgraded to 80 metre high, 100 metre wide easement, 500 kV towers, twice the height of the existing transmission lines, with multiple restrictions to farming practices due to the increased electrical risk. We strongly object to the proposal of 500 kV lines. To date, we have received very little information from AusNet, and that information given has been incorrect, out of date or deceptive, and always followed with threats of compulsory acquisition and associated court and legal costs. Community consultation at Woorah was more like community coercion, with 4 heavily armed policemen at the door of the meeting, where AusNet again addressed none of our practical concerns or enlightened us to the project's rollout. If the Pyrenees Shire was presented with such an unprofessional building project from a local business, the application would no doubt be rejected. The Shire has a responsibility to look after its residents. This project will heavily devalue the land under and surrounding these 500 kV lines and deter future developments and tourism to the area. In financial terms, the compensation offered by AusNet will be entirely inadequate to cover the devaluation and use of the land. Restrictions to agricultural practices are highly unacceptable, with any tractors, headers, trucks, field bins, augers greater than 3 metres being prohibited from being used under or adjacent to the lines. Underground water bores, piping and associated maintenance and access for drilling, crane machines also prohibited. The majority of our land can only be accessed by driving under these lines. If we are prohibited from doing so, we simply cannot farm and improve a large portion of our ground. This is unacceptable. The impacts on current residents will also be significant. If the 500 kV lines go ahead, our unfortunate neighbour's house will be demolished. A man's home is his castle, but obviously not when AusNet come knocking. Future impacts of this line are already being felt. Another neighbour of ours just recently scrapping his dream plans of building his family home near the proposed lines. Tourism and farm stay accommodation also on the firing line, as no one wants to pay to look at these towering monstrosities. These aforementioned impacts have very real consequences on the livelihoods and mental health of those affected. The Shire must take meaningful action to help its residents. In regards to personal safety and fire risk, the overwhelming solution is to place the lines underground. AusNet is bound by legislation to direct landowners to install all new lead-in electrical lines underground. As direct quote, this will be a safer option with the risk of fire and electrocution almost eliminated. AusNet services online. Recent events like the 6 500 kVA transmission towers collapsing at Cressy and horrific consequences that power lines caused on Black Saturday are among valuable lessons that should not be ignored. There are a considerable number of highly concerned fire brigades that are requesting that the CFA response data be modified to stop their brigades from being alerted to respond into the area of 500 kV lines due to the extreme risk. Firefighting efforts are severely restricted when near transmission lines, as the electricity can arc through the smoke to the ground. There are also multiple restrictions in regard to aerial firefighting, where helicopter and plane pilots push their machines to the limits to avoid collision. In light of the recent Ben Major fire at Lexington, and as a volunteer firefighter, I know firsthand that our firefighting volunteers in our area are so determined to protect the community from fire that they are pushed to their limits in regards to personal safety under transmission lines. This is a disaster waiting to happen. In this day and age, this would be solved if the lines were placed underground. In regards to the natural environment, these proposed 500 kV lines easement of 100 metres wide would cause a path of destruction through the native bushlands and reserves of the Shire. Upwards of 100 acres of pristine native bushland consisting of highly significant flora and fauna will be cut down and grubbed out. The bushland and flora will not be allowed to regrow. Even after state offsets, this bushland in our Shire will be permanently lost. This destruction will proliferate a mass media frenzy and responses from green groups around Victoria. This environmental catastrophe should be completely unacceptable to the ideology of environmentally friendly renewable energy. The irony is that whole purpose of this proposed line is to transfer green, clean, renewable energy to end users who care about the impact on the environment. This proposed 500 kV line completely contradicts and ignores those fundamental ideologies by destroying the natural environment. The proposed transmission lines should therefore be placed underground and along existing easements or highways that have minimal impact on the environment. Sir John Monash pioneered a dream to supply Melbourne with electricity for the masses by using poles and wires. 100 years later, we are now looking to supply Melbourne with the greenest, cleanest, most up-to-date means of power generation that today's technology can provide. However, EMO and AusNet obviously did not get that memo. It's time that the Pyrenees Shire, along with the other affected councils, send AusNet and the state government a message that where practical, the proposed transmission lines be placed underground and along existing easements or highways, green and unseen. Benjamin, Matthew, Alexander and Anne Bridie. Thank you very much for that, submission. That's excellent. So that ends the public question time. There's no more questions in relation to that. So we move on to item 10, items for noting. So we had a look at those items, councillors, and is there any questions that any councillors wish to pose in relation to the items for noting? Moved by Councillor Vance, second by Councillor Easton. All those in favour? Thank you. So it moves us on to item 13.1, items for decision. Economic development and tourism, economic development update. Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report before you outlines a range of activities from an economic development perspective for your consideration, councillors. Firstly, in respect of the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions, there are a range of activities that are occurring in response to that. We have a Working for Victoria program that has been underway for the last 6 months, and we have 6 people engaged undertaking a range of activities there, and that program is soon to finish. One of those officers has been a recovery officer who's been engaged in working with particularly the business community around involving visits, phone calls, emails, contact with the range of our businesses to provide a range of current information and assistance. There's been a range of e-news updates circulated to over 500 businesses across the Shire in respect of COVID. The recovery officers also prepared the Top Tourism Town Awards program, which has received a lot of publicity. The state government has announced funding under a business concierge and hospitality support program. That was announced towards the end of April, and funding is being provided for council to engage an officer to continue to assist businesses in respect of COVID safety and other business activities. And council has recently recruited into that position. The Landsborough store business case, we're at the towards the end there of a draft report which outlines the feasibility of a store in Landsborough, and this will soon be finalised around July. The Skipton Hospital project, I'm pleased to advise that we're expecting this to be fully operational by mid-June. The North East Pipeline project, following the public meeting in Nattiellic on the 5th of March, where 60 people from the local community gathered to receive a presentation from GWM Water about what a possible project might look like. There's been further activity in that respect, and council has been facilitating discussions between GWM Water and Central Highlands Water, who have indicated their in principle support for the feasibility study. Case study information has also been gathered from local farmers around how they currently use water and what their water needs are and where the water shortfall has been. And council will soon be advocating for funding to be provided for that feasibility study to be undertaken. In the tourism area, the Avoca Moonabel Cycle Trail is being investigated and developed to encourage that type of tourism activity in the Pyrenees wine region. The Wine Growth Fund, stage 3, funding for that has been utilised in the event space and to assist in the Grampians and Pyrenees wineries to participate in the Melbourne Food and Wine event at Queen Victoria Market on the 30th of July this year to further market Pyrenees wines into the Melbourne market. From a tourism perspective, the Unplug and Unwind marketing campaign, which was in full swing during autumn, appeared to be quite successful, and this has been done in partnership with the City of Ballarat. And a further campaign called Stay Ballarat, Play Pyrenees is also aimed at targeting a Melbourne market. The tourism campaigns have principally been around a range of media, but including social media, which has been a key tool to drive users to the relevant website. The Visiting Friends and Relatives program has been a tourism campaign that has focused on local residents being invited to submit to be regional ambassadors and to submit photos on Facebook or Instagram of their favourite place in the Pyrenees. And I'm pleased to say that there have been over 40 entries in this draw, which is soon to be announced. From an events perspective, it's been pleasing in recent months to see some major events occur, including, the Evoca Races, the Beaufort Town Market, Lake Goldsmith Steam Rally, and the Pyrenees Unearthed Festival, which was a major success. The latest lockdown, however, has impacted significantly on being able to hold events, and unfortunately the Pyrenees Arts Council was required to postpone its annual art and exhibition sale in Beaufort, which has been a major event in this community for many years. An application has been made under the Regional Recovery Fund for $30,000 to assist in kickstarting events in the Pyrenees where events have been significantly impacted. And there'll be some further details to be announced around that event funding for supporting event organisers undertake events during 21 and 22. Another economic development initiative that has been occupying a fair amount of energy and resource in recent times has been the OPAN project. The OPAN project is the Opportunities Pyrenees Ararat Northern Grampians project, a collaborative project undertaken by the three councils with funding support from Regional Development Victoria. Now, the OPAN project has been concentrating on four main areas in recent times, the first being housing, and compelling economics consultants have been engaged to undertake a population growth and housing demand assessment of our key townships across the region and provide an evidence basis for future decision making in respect of stimulating investment in housing. The same consultants are undertaking a piece of work around workforce planning to engage with a limited number of major employers across the region to understand and identify future workforce needs and to develop strategy to address the skills gap of future workforce needs. There's a transport access study and consultants, Movement and Place Consulting, have been engaged to undertake an assessment of current transport access across the region, to develop strategy to meet transport gaps, and to provide evidence basis to support future funding and investment in transport solutions. The fourth area of activity for the OPAN group has been one of migration. And Council will recall in 2019 where Council partnered with AIMS under the Try, Test and Learn project, which was a federally funded project, and a number of initiatives were undertaken to look to migrate migrants into our region to create a workforce to fill the number of jobs that were projected in the next 5 years. Now, whilst that project has ceased, Council, the OPAN group is looking to engage and employ a migration coordinator to work with employers to assist those employers in relocating people to the region for employment. And that work is to continue over the next 6 months. So, Mr Mayor, that is an outline of some of the major economic development activity that has been occurring from a Pyrenees perspective in recent months. And sorry, with that, Mr Mayor, I'll also note that there is a recommendation there. Firstly, that Council notes the report. Secondly, that Council investigates funding opportunities to progress the feasibility of the North East Pyrenees Pipeline project. Thirdly, that Council seeks a report to be presented to July Council meeting on the outcome of the Lands Restore business case project. And fourthly, that council seeks a further report to be presented to council on the kickstarting events in the Pyrenees project.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. Councillor Vance, would you like to speak on that?
I'm happy to move the recommendation to start with, Mr Mayor.
Oh, sorry, who'd like to move the recommendation before who'd like to move it? Councillor Vance? Second, Councillor Clark. Councillor Vance.
Yeah,
Getting ahead of myself.
thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to thank our CEO for the in-depth report there. There are, in my opinion, three very important steps in the future of the northern end of the Shire anyway, especially with the pipeline into Natty Alec and hopefully Moonabel and Redbank. That's one project that I've had a strong passion for a long time. And the community that I live in Landsborough is just screaming out for the general store to be reinstated and bring some community back into our town so that people have got somewhere to not only buy their bread and milk and their paper, but also communicate. A post office is a meeting point at the moment, but we all know in small communities, the lifeblood of that area is being able to get together and have a bit of a chinwag, even if it is only for half an hour while you go and get your bread and milk and whatever. The events after the COVID, which we're still experiencing at the moment, is something that needs to work its way through. And I'm pleased to see that our appropriate officer is out there working away at it. And that is very good. At least it's giving the people that are in business a bit of a kickstart in some cases, and also some faith that the council are working away behind the scenes to help them. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to really reiterate Councillor Vance's comments, these projects do sometimes take a little while to happen, and I think the straw pallet project's a really good example of that, but good things come to those that wait, and I'm sure for Councillor Vance at your top end, good things will be coming to you as well. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any other councillors like to speak on that? I think it's just to take up a little bit what Councillor Vance said. I think if we can keep that money in those towns, it's a bonus, and it does really make that community connect. So it's so important, that community connection and that social aspect of not just buying some bread and milk, but having a chat. So really important. So all those in favour? Thank you. Item 13.2, Avoca River Flats. You, Mr Gowns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide Council with information relating to the state's proposed regulated watercourse land regulations and how the proposed regulations might inform Council's approach to land management matters associated with the Avoca River Flats. The regulations seek to provide a consistent approach to the regulation of recreational activities whilst protecting the environment, including natural and cultural values and water quality, supporting the enjoyment of those using the land for recreation, and managing fire risk. The regulations prohibit the disposal of soap and grey water within 20 metres of a watercourse and require that all waste and personal property be removed prior to vacating the land. The regulations also seek to restrict camping from within 20 metres of a watercourse and prohibit camping in the same area for more than 28 consecutive nights. The regulations apply to all Crown land within 200 metres of a watercourse, except if the land is vested in trustees or a municipal council or managed by a committee of management appointed under the Crown Land Act. Under its current management arrangement, the frontage will be subject to the new regulations once enacted on the 1st of September 2021. The Avoca community continues to highlight the importance of the frontage to the town's tourism and visitation, public open space and amenity. It is probable that the regulations will facilitate additional demand on the frontage through extended stays. With the frontage under the management of DELP, Council does not have the authority to regulate the recreational usage of the area, including camping, and therefore may not be able to protect the asset to ensure that it continues to provide all the benefits to the community that it currently does. In considering whether or not to influence the management of the frontage, council should be informed as to the value that the frontage provides to the community, both as a public open space suitable for informal recreational and community events, and as a location that supports overnight visitation to the town. Council may also seek to understand how the change management arrangements impact the community market, the Pyrenees Unearthed Festival, and other events that the frontage is capable of hosting. Therefore, it's the officer's recommendation that council further investigates the impact of the land regulations that are likely to have an impact on the Avoca River frontage between the Pyrenees Highway to Duke Street by consulting with the Avoca community and the business sector. And following the completion of recommendation 1, seek a further report to be presented to council detailing the findings and any options for intervention.
Thank you, Mr Gowans. Councillors have a recommendation there. Would someone like to do it? Councillor Easton, second. Councillor Clark. Councillor Easton, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On the long weekend just passed, there were many vans down on the river flat utilising the services and supporting the many businesses and towns in the area. It was wonderful to see them there. They are a sight to behold. In relation to this report, I thank the officers for considering all these issues that we've discussed in the past. I recommend to any locals who wish to be involved in the consultation to contact council or myself for details of how that consultation will be handled. The consultation is needed to understand the changes caused by land regulation and these changes coming into effect in September. The changes also regulate any water frontages on local farms. So it's not only the water frontage in the town that is going to be affected by these changes.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I really have a couple of questions. I think it's most appropriate that we do some further work on this, but if I could ask a couple of questions, please, Mr Gowans. The first one's clear and noted as fine, that these are statewide regulations that we are caught up in the process of this. Is nothing specific, isn't it?
Correct.
That's correct. So in terms of understanding what the likely impacts are, effectively, there may be some small limitations to where people can camp, but certainly our capacity for people to use it as open space, but more particularly things like our capacity to have an event like Pyrenees Unearthed there when there are already campers, effectively what is not on a piece of land the council controls, are really the issues that we wish to investigate. Would that be correct?
Through you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Clark, for your question. That is correct. There is a road reserve that adjoins the river frontage that council does have control of and is the land manager. However, it's quite common that in some of these larger events, the whole space is utilised. To date, we haven't had major issues with the interaction of an event and camping, but it is possible, and council really doesn't have any powers to move campers on, even if there's a public event planned for that area. So that is something that does need some consideration. It's also been suggested that potentially some better regulation or facilities could be provided for people camping on the riverfront, which might be, fire pits or the like, that might provide an indication of where camping should or shouldn't be. At this point, obviously the land being managed by DELB, they haven't got any particular desire to provide any enhanced facilities. And if council was of the view and the community was of the view that enhanced facilities were something that they might wish to consider, then the management options would need to be further looked at.
Any other councillors wish to speak on that? All those in favour? Thank you. That brings us to, excuse me, item 13.3, renaming of a section of Mountain View Road. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to finalise the renaming of a portion of Mountain View Road north of Moonabel to remove confusion and allow for a recent extension of that road. At the ordinary meeting of Council on the 20th of July 2020, Council resolved to commence the process for the renaming of a section of Mountain View Road, Moonabel, with a view to remove confusion with property addresses. Following that resolution from Council, Goddard Lane, which is the proposed alternate name, was advertised in the Pyrenees Advocate and gave public notice of the proposed renaming and sought public feedback. The letters were also sent to neighbouring properties on the 12th of March 2021 that gave notice of the proposed renaming and sought feedback. 2 submissions were received in the 4-week consultation period, 1 verbal and 1 written. Both submissions wanted to keep the current naming of Mountain View Road, but unfortunately that's unable to be accommodated due to the need to comply with the statutory requirements for naming roads, features and localities, and the Australian standards for signing and rural and urban addressing. So to complete the naming process, a name needs to be formally adopted by Council, and the proposal is that be Goddard Lane, along with a recommendation to forward a report to the Registrar of Geographic Names for the consideration of this renaming in accordance if Council does resolve to agree to that. And the officer's recommendation is that Council seeks approval from the Registrar of Geographic Names to proceed with the use of the name Goddard Lane, and subject to in principle report, Council adopts the name Goddard Lane, which has historical ties to the area, and then forwards a report to the Registrar of Geographic Names for changing in the Gazette. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramble. Yes. Seconded by Councillor Clark. Yep. Councillor Vance, would you like to speak on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. This is just a matter of process, really, but I just make a note that I did go through the list of prisoners that went through the jail at Moonabel at a recent function, and I didn't see the name Goddard there, so we're pretty safe in that regard, I think.
Councillor Clark. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? All those in favour? Thank you. Internal Audit Program Service Provider. Is that you, Ms Bramwell? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek Council endorsement of a recommendation to extend the existing contract for internal audit services provision for a further 12 months. The current contract for internal audit services provision was awarded in 2017 to AFS and Associates of Bendigo as a result of a public tender process. Annexure A of the contract, item 11, allows for further terms to be awarded of 1 times 1 times 1 year options. And in 2020, Council approved an extension of the original contract for a further 12 months to the 30th of June 2021, following a recommendation made by Council's Audit and Risk Committee. To maintain consistency of approach and building upon the organisational knowledge developed over the past 4 years by AFS and Associates, it's now considered appropriate that the second term extension option in the contract be utilised to extend the contract by a further 12 months to 30th of June 2022. Council's Audit and Risk Committee have considered via email exchange extending the contract for a further 12 months and have made a recommendation to Council that this is endorsed through Council resolution. And the officer recommendation is that Council extends the existing contract with AFS and Associates for internal audit services for a further 12 months to 30th of June 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, recommendation. Councillor Easton, with seconding. Thank you. Councillor Keogh. Councillor Easton, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As a member of the Audit Committee, I've looked at the work handled by AFS and Associates and find it to be a very high standard, and I believe the extension is well warranted.
Councillor Keogh?
Just want to try this out. No, I just second that, so thank you.
Any other councillors wish to speak on that? Yeah, I'm also sit on the Audit and Risk Committee, and I find that their service is very good, and it's very fitting for what we do here. So they provide a very, very good service. So I can't see why we wouldn't extend it. So all those in favour? Thank you. The annual budget. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report presents to Council the proposed budget for the financial year 2021-22 and the following 3 financial years. Section 94 of the Local Government Act 2020 requires that Council prepares a budget for the upcoming financial year and the 3 subsequent financial years. And the draft budget for the next financial year has been prepared by councillors and council officers and was submitted to Council in April in its draft form and then submitted for public consultation. A great deal of work was undertaken to find cost savings, and that is reflected in the budget. Rate increases have been capped to 1.5% in line with the Victorian Government's Virgo rate system. And despite the financial challenge that this poses, Council is determined to maintain current services while working within the cap. The draft budget includes capital works of 9.14 million, and there's a few things that are included within the body of the report, and it's been prepared in line with the draft revenue and rating plan. The budget does include a waste management service, which is fully funded by waste service charges. And the charge for the next financial year includes additional costs related to curbside collection and the disposal of glass, an extension of curbside collection services within the Shire in accordance with the circular economy imposed by the government, which was referred to by my colleague earlier, and an increase to the EPA levy. Submissions to the budget were considered at a council briefing on Tuesday the 8th of June. In addition to those submissions, council officers have made the following changes to the draft budget released for public consultation, or since public consultation, and that the rate in the dollars be levied as general rates under section 158 of the Act have been updated to reflect the final revaluation figures which were received after the proposed budget was published, and waste management charges and costs information within the budget have been updated to reflect contract prices approved at the council meeting on the 18th of May 2021. So this report presents the proposed budget and has been based on the ongoing delivery of current services and service levels. And the officer's recommendation is that council, having considered submissions to the revised draft budget 2021-22, resolves to adopt the budget and to authorise the Chief Executive Officer to give notice of the decision to adopt such budget, and then a few official requirements to be formally adopted that I won't read out, but are included in the body of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramble. We've got a recommendation there, councillors. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Kerr, seconder. Councillor Clark. Councillor Kerr, would you like to speak to that?
Only again to say thanks for all the work that's gone into from officers, and we and looking forward to being able to put that budget into place and make some great things happen. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. This has been a little bit less eventful budget than we had last year, and that's a really good thing. I think we enjoy that. It's a much simpler process as well. Valuations have been pretty consistent across the patch. I think it is worth noting a couple of things particularly about this. Ms Bramwell mentioned cost savings, and they're not significant, but about a third of our council revenue goes on wages and salaries. Our rate cap limits us to 1.5%. our wages have moved by about 2.5 this year, partly because of our WB, but partly also because everybody's getting an extra 0.5% in their superannuation contribution. So that's about $65,000 that we've had to find. It doesn't sound like a lot, but we try to get our money spent on services, so that's a really key thing. I think the garbage charge is something that I think is really important for council to note. When council went out to public consultation, we were talking about a fee that might have been in the order of around $550. Due to council's good management, that fee is much closer now to $500 at $498, which I think is a terrific thing in that sense. And at that time, they were the best numbers we had. That's one of the challenges of going out to consultation before you actually finish getting contracts finalised. But any reduction from what we estimated, always a good outcome for the community. Just two questions, if I could, please, Ms. Bramwell. Firstly, our local roads and community infrastructure program, where we've been given an extension, do you have any sense of when those potential projects may start coming to council for us to look at for the next financial year?
Thank you, Councillor Clark. If I could pass that over to the CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. There are 3 phases of this program. Phase 1 and Phase 2 have come to council and council have determined the allocation, where they're to be allocated. Phase 2, the expenditure of Phase 2 is incorporated into the 21-22 budget. In respect of Phase 3, which is the more sizable allocation, the timing on that is into the end of, I think it's December 2022 for completion of those works. And we will bring a report to council in the coming months around that, but we've not yet sort of done that work necessary to inform ourselves about what might be the most appropriate projects to recommend. But it does have a longer lead time on Phase 3 than what Phases 1 and 2 were, very much stimulus projects to get them going quickly.
Yeah.
So we would certainly be bringing that back to council.
Thank you very much. And if I could, Mr. Mayor, just one more question. Ms. Bramwell, often at this time of year we get an early payment of our financial assistance grants from the federal government, which I know it stuffs up our book, but it means we've got money in the bank, and that's always nice for the 1st of July. Have we had any early payments as yet?
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I'm not sure if we've actually received them yet, but we are due to receive them before the end of the financial year, so yes.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Yes,
Mr. Mayor, if I may. There's just what before you actually take a final vote on this. In section 3 of the officer's recommendation, instalment 4, the date of collection for that is incorrect. It should be 2022, not 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bramwell. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? I'd just like to thank the work thank the people for the work that's gone into this. It's excuse me, been ever changing, and there's been a lot of things thrown into the mix. So there's a significant amount of work that goes into making this all happen, and there's so much that has to be considered. So it's just thank you to the staff and the financial staff that have been involved in putting this budget together. So all those in favour? Thank you. Revenue and rating plan 13.3.4. Ms. Bramwell, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is for council to consider and adopt the revenue and rating plan 2021 to 2025. Under section 93 of the Local Government Act 2020, all councils are required to prepare and adopt a revenue and rating plan covering a minimum period of 4 financial years by the next 30th of June following each council election, which means the 30th of June 2021 in this case. The revenue and rating plan articulates council's revenue raising strategy of determining the most appropriate and sustainable mixture of rates, grants, fees and charges and other income that will provide the revenue stream needed for its annual budget and long-term financial plan, while adhering to the tests of equity, efficiency, simplicity and diversity. This includes rates itself, which represent a significant revenue source for council, comprising approximately 36% of its annual income. and the plan recommends a continuation of Council's current rating strategy, and there's details there of the rating system inclusions within the body of the report. A draft revenue and rating plan was endorsed for community consultation at the ordinary meeting of Council on the 20th of April 2021, and community engagement on the draft plan included public notices, mail out to all addresses within the Shire, Facebook posts, copies of the draft plan made available at front counters, and an electronic plan was on the Council's website. No feedback or submissions were received in relation to the plan. Minor changes to the draft presented were made by officers to provide more clarity around the administration of the waste management charge in response to an internal audit recommendation that was made last year. And in accordance with the Gender Equality Act 2020, a gender impact assessment was conducted and included in the final plan. I should say that's the first one that we've made under the new Act. So in conclusion, following a period of community consultation, the four-year plan is now presented for Council to consider and adopt. And it's the Office's recommendation that Council resolves to adopt the revenue and rating plan from 2021 to 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we've got a recommendation there. Anyone like to move that? Councillor Clark, someone like to second that? Councillor Vance, Councillor Clark, would you like to speak on that?
I don't think. There we go, good. Mr Mayor, other than just to say this is a quite important document, if you do want to understand a little bit about what Council does and how we raise our revenue, it really is an important document. And while 36% of our money is really important, so is the other 64%, is if we can raise it from somewhere else and we don't have to take it from our ratepayers, and long may we continue to increase that.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was just interested to see the figure 36%. That appears to drop down a bit on previous figures. Is that correct, or is that my misinterpretation? I thought we were always in 40+% of the overall expenditure was raised from council rates.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. It was slightly higher, but we've received an increase in the financial assistance grants. But no, it's always, well, for the last few years that I've been involved in it, it's always been in the 30%.
Thank you.
Any other councillors like to speak on that? Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is another one of those documents that have been changed slightly with the new legislation. It's a document now out for 4 years instead of the 1 or 2 that we would normally run by. It adds additional workload to our staff, and our staff do a wonderful job to get it done for us. It also helps us in our planning going forward. So again, I'd just like to thank the staff for the work involved.
Thank you. Councillor Keogh. All those in favour? Thank you. 13.3.5, Community Asset Committee, 5 Station Street, Avoca. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider establishing a new Community Asset Committee for the purposes of managing and maintaining the newly acquired property at 2 Station Street, Avoca. Section 65(1) of the Local Government Act allows Council to establish community asset committees and appoint members to those committees as necessary to enable a committee to manage a community asset within the municipal district. And Section 47(1)(b) of the Act allows the Chief Executive Officer, by instrument of delegation, to delegate any power, duty or function of the Council that has been delegated to the Chief Executive Officers to the members of that committee. Pyrenees Shire Council recently completed the acquisition of property to the north of the railway line in Avoca at 2 Station Street, Avoca. And it is now proposed that activities and management of that facility should be undertaken on behalf of Council by members of the existing Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Incorporated, the committee of which currently sublease and manage the premises on the southern side of the railway line at the old railway station in Avoca. And it's proposed that the existing committee will form the membership of the Community Asset Committee for 2 Station Street, Avoca, and Council is now requested to formalise appointment of membership to the Community Asset Committee with the names that are listed in the body of the report. An instrument of delegation is under preparation for authorisation by the Chief Executive Officer, together with a governance manual similar to that provided to other committees recently. And in conclusion, it's now recommended that Council establishes a new Community Asset Committee to manage the newly acquired premises at 2 Station Street, Avoca, to be known as the Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Community Asset Committee. Formally appoints the community representatives listed to the Community Asset Committee, them being the current members of the existing Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Incorporated Committee, and requires, in accordance with section 47(6) of the Local Government Act, council officers to appropriately guide and monitor activities of the committee established under 65 of the Act and report annually on committee activities to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillor's got a recommendation there. Someone like to move that? Thanks. Councillor Easton, we've got a second there. Councillor Vance. Councillor Easton, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is another sizable piece of land coming under the control of the Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Committee, and I recommend that all committee members understand the 2 sections of land that they now have under their control. One is a committee of council, the other is a lease from council. And those 2 agendas need to be both understood by all committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Councillor Vance. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? All those in favour? Thank you. 13.3.6, councillor allowances. Ms Bramwell, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to endorse the setting of councillor allowances for the next 4 years. Section 39 of the Local Government Act provides that mayors and councillors are entitled to receive an allowance while performing their duty as an elected official, and the Victorian Government sets the upper and lower levels for allowances paid to councillors. Despite the repeal of sections 33 and 34 of the Local Government Act 1989, this section continues to apply in respect of allowances payable until the first determination is made by the Victorian Independent Remuneration Tribunal, which has not yet been made. Allowances payable to councillors are currently determined by councils in accordance with the limits set by the Victorian Government. And section 74 of the Local Government Act 1989 requires councils to review allowance levels by the 30th of June in the year following a general election. And the allowance level determined remains in effect for the full term of the council. Allowance levels are subject to annual reviews undertaken by the Minister for Local Government, and the Minister has conducted this review under section 73B of the Local Government Act 1989 and determined that this year no adjustment to allowances will be made in respect of all councils. What this means is that the allowances made to councillors and the mayor will be the same as they were in the previous year before the general election. In addition to that, superannuation at the required rate is also paid. The officer's recommendation, therefore, is that Council, in accordance with the ministerial direction, resolves that councillor allowances for the term of the new council remain as in place before the general election as follows: that the mayoral allowance be $62,884 per annum plus superannuation guarantee, that the council allowance be $21,049 per annum plus the superannuation guarantee, and that allowances be adjusted annually in accordance with reviews undertaken by the Minister for Local Government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramble. Recommendation there, council. Someone like to move that? Councillor Vance, seconder. Councillor Easton. Councillor Vance, you wish to speak on that? Councillor Easton, any councillors wish to speak on that? All those in favour? Thank you. That takes us to item 13.4.1, Western Victorian Transmission Network Project. Mr Nolan, is that you?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to inform Council about the Western Victorian Transmission Network project and to seek direction from Council in respect of the project. The report before you contains an excerpt from the the project website, and for the benefit of listeners tuning into the live stream tonight, I'll read sort of part of that. The West Vic Transmission Network project proposes the development of a new transmission line starting at Balgana near Stawell in Victoria's west and covering approximately 190 kilometres to the northwestern Melbourne suburb of Sydenham. The project is critical infrastructure required to unlock the renewable energy potential of Western Victoria as a key renewable energy zone and will help deliver clean, affordable energy to Victorians. The project will also drive economic growth and bring new job opportunities to the region. The project will include a new terminal station to the north of Ballarat, a new 220 kV double circuit overhead transmission line from the new terminal station to Balgana via Warborough, a new 500 kV double circuit overhead transmission line from Sydenham to the new terminal station north of Ballarat, and several minor upgrades including existing electricity infrastructure. The project is being delivered by AusNet Services. The project will need assessment and approval from both the state and federal governments. As part of the assessment and approval process, we will undertake, AusNet Services will undertake detailed environmental, heritage, social investigations and will involve community involvement along the way. The area of interest that was originally identified in early 2020 was based on a range of technical investigations on the land between Balgana and Sydenham. Following consideration of community consultation and feedback, along with early investigations, AusNet Services narrowed down the area of interest to corridors. These corridors are currently being considered and advice in respect of the corridors is due in the coming days and weeks. And it is understood then that once a single corridor is identified for the project, the further work then will be to identify and refine the final route. A fact sheet was attached to this report from the website as well, which provides more detail, and I encourage members of the community to access the website and to have a look at that information. Of importance to Pyrenees, however, is that Section 1 and part of Section 2 of the corridors within the Pyrenees Shire and close proximity to the townships of Lexton and Warborough. In August 22, the Minister for Planning required that an environmental effects statement, an EES, be prepared to assess the potential environmental effects of the project. And again, I refer to Council and the community to the scoping document, which was approved by the Minister, which effectively sets out the scope of that work. And that's effectively the scoping document, councillors, where there is quite a bit of detail about what is approved. And there is a component of the scoping document that has been copied and incorporated into the council agenda. Essentially, and further to, and picking up the sentiment of many of the questions that were raised at the start of this meeting, it's important, I'll just draw attention to the fact that the scoping document states that new transmission lines will operate at 220 kV between Bulgana and the other new terminal station to be built to the north of Ballarat, and at 500 kV between the new terminal station at Sydenham. And also further, and in respect of the differences between the 220 and the 500 kV line, the proposed overhead transmission line will require lattice towers spaced at intervals of approximately 450 to 550 metres. Towers will be 40 to 60 metres high for the 220 kV section of the project and 60 to 80 metres high for the 500 kV section. The proponent will seek to acquire easements in which to build and operate the project, and the easements will typically be between 40 and 60 metres wide for the 220 kV line and 70 to 100 metres wide for the 500 kV section of the project. And the area of interest includes 6 municipalities. AusNet Transmission Group has been engaged as the proponent of the project, and the technical assessments work has commenced. A technical reference group has been appointed to advise the proponent, and the TRG includes representation from Pyrenees Shire by the Manager of Planning and Development Services, Katie Gleisner. The proponent has undertaken community engagement and drop-in sessions in relevant townships, including a drop-in session at Waubra in March 2021. And as I've mentioned earlier, the community consultation plan, which I encourage members of the community who may be affected to read that consultation plan, and it page 21 clearly outlines that that AusNet have committed to a range of ongoing consultation and opportunities for the community to have input into this project, as I read out earlier. Council also acknowledges the fact that members of the community have expressed concerns about the level of consultation and engagement, and those comments from the community are well noted by Council. The project has attracted a significant amount of media attention and interest in communities generally, and Council will need to monitor the input and process given to the potential for impacts. Possible impacts and considerations which will form part of the EES, and further to what was advised earlier in the evening, some of these considerations include alternative corridors, as mentioned, alternative alignments, site locations and designs, potential effects on biodiversity, including loss, degradation or fragmentation of habitat, effects on Aboriginal historic cultural heritage values, impacts on visual and landscape values, and other effects on land uses and the community. Important for the community is the visual impact of the overhead power lines, and for landowners within the corridor, the impact on land uses, including on agricultural activities, along with many of the other concerns that were raised earlier tonight. While the scoping document describes the proposed transmission line between Waubra and Bulgana as 220 kV, it is understood that consideration is also being given to an alternative higher capacity 500 kV line, which, if adopted, is likely to have a greater impact. Council may seek to support our affected communities by ensuring there is sufficient dissemination of information, by encouraging residents and landowners to get involved. It's also suggested the Council look to stay informed by engaging with the proponent, collaborating with other affected councils, with a view to forming a position on the project in due course. Currently, work is being undertaken to define the preferred corridor in line with the lease constraints. It's expected that this will be finalised coming in mid to late 2021. It will be important that Council gives consideration to having input into the process for determining the preferred route within the Pyrenees Shire. It will also be important for Council to consider making a submission to the EES once the EES is placed on exhibition. It is understood that the public inquiry, which is to be held to consider the EES on exhibition, together with a draft planning scheme amendment, is to occur in mid-2022. So, Council, further to that summary of the relevant issues, and I guess just like to reiterate the complexity of this as a major project. From a planning perspective, the Minister has determined that an EES is required, essentially because it is of state significance and it crosses multiple municipal boundaries. As such, when the EES is exhibited for public input, there will also be a planning scheme amendment undertaken to the Pyrenees planning scheme, as well as the other planning schemes from the associated councils. And the EES will inform that planning scheme amendment. So they'll both go on exhibition at the same time. That's my understanding as Mayor. It's also understood that this project is the subject of a federal consideration under the EPBC Act. That's the Environment. The words have escaped me. Sorry, the EPBC Act, Mr. Mayor, which is a federal piece of legislation. So, councillors, there is a recommendation there before you. And Council may feel free to provide any further resolutions in respect of this project. But the recommendation is that Council continues to ensure that it has representation on the technical reference group for the project. That Council invites representations from the proponent, AusNet Services, to meet with Council, to brief Council on the project in particular, and the process for determining the preferred corridor. That Council engages with other affected councils to share information and understanding about the project. That Council seeks to engage with the affected landowners, residents and community in the Shire to assist in understanding the local views and concerns about the project, and continues to advocate on behalf of the affected communities to AusNet Services where appropriate, and seeks that a progress report be brought to Council in 6 months or earlier as appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillors, we have a recommendation. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Clark, seconder. Councillor Easton. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a couple of questions and a few things. And I'd also like to foreshadow that once this resolution is passed, I'd like to put a further one to the meeting around what we do with the submissions that we've received tonight as well, in that sense. Ms. Nolan, just if I can ask a couple of questions first, please. As you noted in the report, we do have somebody on the technical reference group, but other than that, we don't have any other particular engagement directly with the project over and above what an ordinary community person has, do we?
Thank you, Councillor Clark. The AusNet Services have sought to engage with the CEOs of the affected councillors on at least 2 occasions. Mostly that has been to inform the CEOs about process. At different times, CEOs may raise concerns, and in recent times, I have raised with AusNet Services concerns in respect of impact on agriculture, and in particular I referenced the guides working and living within transmission line easements, which was the subject of some discussion with councillors also, and my understanding is that AusNet Services are looking to provide an update version on that in terms of the impact on agriculture, with some frequently asked questions and so forth. So that has been a forum that AusNet Services has initiated with CEOs. But apart from that, and that's not a formal process, apart from that, there is the TRG, as you mentioned, where we have representation, and much of the technical input that occurs there is effectively in response to the technical work as it occurs. The terms of reference for the TRG is such that there are elements of confidentiality in respect of that, because it is work in progress, and until the EES is completed and put on exhibition, will that information necessarily become available. It's not for the TRG to provide that information, but rather for AusNet Services to provide that information to the community. The only other representation, Councillor Clark, is that there is a community reference group that AusNet Services is forming, and AusNet have sought expressions of interest from members of the community to participate in that. But that's not a council-initiated project, but there are members of our community that could participate through that forum.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My second question is in terms of both council's capacity to submit to the EES and when, and you indicated in your report the logical time to do that is when we actually have an EES on display, which will, I assume, provide us a range of options which council can comment on in terms of what the community believes and council believes are the most technically feasible and best suited to the community. Are we limited to wait to that point in time, or can we actually make submissions earlier, Mr. Nolan?
My understanding, Councillor Clark, is that council, as effectively a stakeholder in this project, can participate in the range of other sort of consultation and engagement activities that AusNet have identified in their consultation plan, and they include, the online portal, and the other things that I mentioned earlier, the targeted meetings and workshops, the interactive mapping tool, and so forth. So there are means by which council could provide input into that process, and effectively through our representation on the TRG, our representative could provide input into some of that technical work in terms of the adequacy and the I guess the extent to which it actually addresses some of the impacts that have been brought to the attention of council tonight. They're sorts of things that our representative on the TRG could reasonably raise with that group.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Noel. Mr. Mayor, just to try and understand where we're at this point in time, I think a couple of our neighbouring councils have given some direction in some of these issues, and tonight we haven't done that as yet. And I feel a little bit at this stage we're not quite in a position where council can actually do that, but we may well get to that position reasonably soon. I think the community and council have quite a right to be concerned. This is a significant scale project, and there's also significant uncertainty as to what we're actually getting in this context. As we said, the project in terms of what has been scoped is about a 220 kV line, yet clearly in the process of doing that, AusNet have investigated the capacity to put a 500 kV line in, and the only reference to a 500 kV line is in a little piece of government policy that was only released a couple of months ago. So it's very unclear for the community about where they sit. I think that's a challenge, and we don't know anything more than anyone else in this municipality in the context of that, and that's part of our challenge. But I think in terms of those key issues that the community raised with us today, and there's four of them in my mind: vegetation loss, vegetation loss is a really specific one for us in Pyrenees Shire, particularly in that Lexington area, is probably the most affected piece of certainly within our municipality, our most affected piece where there is significant native vegetation. Those restrictions on commercial operations, and again, a bit like the line, we have a guidance document that gives us thing, and I live under one of these power lines now, and I'm able to do most of the things that I need to do pretty much in that sense. But if that is to be revised and we don't know what the revision is, again, we're in that position of uncertainty. I think the other two are the other ones that have come to us particularly, which is what type of line are we getting? Is it an underground or an over? And I take some heart from what Mr Nolan has said in that the EES will look at all the options available to us. So that is a really good step forward in the context that we're not just looking at an overhead line as the only option. So that gives us some certainty and probably some time as council before we have to make a decision. And then I think that fourth one about the corridor itself is a really interesting one in the context of, is it limited to where the existing power line is today, or is it in other places? And I know that some of the submissions today have talked about putting it in conjunction with other public infrastructure, particularly roads. Now, I think that is really appropriate if you're on the other side of Ballarat in that context of things, but it is particularly problematic for us in the Pyrenees Shire because we don't have any freeways apart from the Western Freeway, and getting to the Western Freeway, I think, is a pretty significant issue. So to put those things on public roads here, I think would require some real thinking of council if it was to take a position like that, because that actually means we're going to put it through our little towns like Warburg and Lexington and Learmonth and things like that. So I think there's some clarity we need to do there. As the resolution recommends, I think we need to do a bit of listening in that sense of things. And I've got some suggestions around that I might deal with in the next resolution. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to say that with the submissions that we received this evening, excuse me, that there is obviously fear and uncertainty from the fact that we're not getting answers from AusNet. And most of the reasoning for that probably is because they don't know the answers. The questions are being asked at the moment through the EES, and what is going to happen is that EES will become available with the answers. And our community wants some answers now, and unfortunately council is unable to give you those answers, and I don't think anybody can at the moment. This is a process that needs to be stepped through with a lot of care, and I'd like to make sure that our community, particularly those worried people that put submissions in tonight, understand that council is watching the process and will support our community to understand the process and the options for the community to be involved. It's not something that we are unaware of. We are looking at it for you and we are trying to help you. But some of the questions that were asked tonight are very, very early on in the process, and I don't believe that answers are available from anybody at the present time. As Mr Nolan said, this is a significant project within the state, which gives it a lot more involvement. The federal government are involved. So please take note that we understand what's happening. We have our eye on it, and we are going to try and help you get to understand what is happening around you and help you through it.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Vance.
This may be one that you can't answer, Mr CEO, but could you give me a little bit of an indication of the members that make up the EES, the study itself, who comprises that group?
Just give me a moment. Councillor Vance. Thank you for that question. I'm referring to the scoping document, which is approved by the Minister, which requires that a TRG be established. And all it says is that the TRG is to comprise representatives of relevant state government agencies, departments, registered Aboriginal parties and local government authorities to advise DELP and the proponent on those range of activities. So, yeah, state agencies and departments, registered Aboriginal parties and local authorities.
So it's fair to assume it's not just 3 different individuals, there's quite a solid group that are conducting this EES.
That's usually the case. Having participated in EES process previously, there are usually a lot of technical experts from a range of government agencies involved to have input, because they all have a stake and an interest and they have a contribution to make. So it does involve a range of government agencies.
Yep. I go on further to ask, is there any opportunity being given to the affected parties that might be part of that in the way of VFF or some such representing the landowner? So I can hear the government sides being represented, and at the end of the day, it's inevitable. We've got to have an alternative source of power to combat climate change. And this is the obvious, isn't it, when we've got so much power being generated from the turbines in our area. But I just would like to think that the farming community, especially, that are affected dramatically, have their opportunity to have their voice heard during this study.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Keogh, do you wish to speak on that? I think I'm with Councillor Eason that we hear very clear what's being said, and unfortunately we haven't got the answers, and I'm not sure all the answers are available, but we're trying to seek them as much as the landholders and the affected parties are, and I think it's just something we've got to keep working together and work towards to get those answers and take away some of that unsurety of what's going to transpire in the future. So, all those in favour? Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Mr. Back has got what I proposed. Councillors read that if I can get a second.
So, yeah, second. Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Eason. Do you wish to speak on that, Councillor Clark?
Quickly, thank you, and I apologise that I'm not sure the members of the public can see this, but there's effectively 2 parts to this new resolution, and the first part is to provide to AusNet the questions and information provided by members of the public to this council meeting the 15th of June 2021, but secondly, to seek from AusNet to convene a further community consultation in Warburg and Lexington regarding the project as soon as practical. I mean, again, we're not in a position as council to be able to answer those questions, but certainly AusNet, if anyone is, and I think council should pursue that with the utmost urgency.
Yeah. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support the recommendation, and if unfortunately AusNet don't find their way to be able to hold meetings, I think as council, to try and allay any fears that we may have in the community, that council may have some public meetings themselves. But I hope AusNet take the opportunity to try and support our community and run these sessions as requested.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? I think it's a really sensible submission and motion that, we really, it shows that we are listening to our community and we do want to support them, and like them, we do want some answers as well. So, and probably want them as soon as we can so we can think to the future. So, all those in favour? Thank you. Councillor reports. council reports, so we might go to councillor Keogh first, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess the biggest thing that's been topical in our area is the waste collection curbside that's going to be changing as we in the coming months. I've had a great amount of residents very keen to be able to access this service that haven't been able to, the curbside service that haven't been able to before. There have been some concerns and questions that have been addressed and will be addressed as we're moving into this new system. I did have a community meeting too at Stone Lea in the last month, and that was a community-led meeting in regards to the gold exploration, one of the newest gold exploration licences that's being pursued in the area. This meeting, though, was more than anything to put questions out there and ask questions that maybe council was able to answer, or the proponent wanting to put forward the exploration licence. So council was able to answer those questions that were related to council issues, and the community were very thankful for that. But obviously most of those questions will be going to that company looking to do that. But it was lovely just to get together face to face with a number of residents in that area, aside from the issue that was being looked at. I was also able to participate in MAV online training. It's wonderful to be able to take benefit of the online virtual meetings. Having little ones, that's made it quite easy to actually undertake more training than I normally would. So that one was last month. The next one I will be involved in is this Thursday, which is the land use planning and building one. So thanks out to the MAV for making a lot of those virtual, because that's made them a lot more accessible. And that's all from me, my area. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Keogh. Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I occupied the chair for the election of new office bearers for the Landsborough Hall and also the Barclay Hall during the month. I was lucky enough to, along with the rest of us, to go through the Lexington Hub and have an inspection as it's progressing along. Very impressive indeed. Another occasion I had was to go to Moonabel about 10 days ago for the opening of some sculptures that have been placed in old Moonabel jail. It was quite a very interesting afternoon. It was attended by probably 30 odd people, and in relation to the 3 children that are in there, they were how they ever got from Landsborough to Moonabel, I'm not too sure, and I hope it's not a reflection on the Landsborough community, but it does go back to the 1870s, I believe. And there was a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old found wandering the streets in Moonabel. As I said, I don't know how they got there. I don't think they walked from Landsborough, but the children were placed in a lock-up overnight and then went on to the Magistrates Court, I believe, in Ballarat, where they were placed into an orphanage. And it just so happened that 3 of the grandchildren of one of those children were present and told the story about their gran, and related to growing up with her. She actually looked after the children, so it must have been in the family, because their mother obviously fell off the scene somewhere, and the children were raised by their grandmother in Swan Hill. And it was a very interesting afternoon. I also had a Zoom meeting with Rural Councils Victoria last week. It was virtually a report on their summit that was held at Ngambie. Unfortunately, Councillor Vance at the last minute pulled out on the summit at Ngambie because of the COVID restrictions that were introduced or coming into action on the Thursday evening. So I thought better off travelling all the way to Ngambie, thinking that the summit might drop short. anyway, it kept going and Councillor Vance didn't get there. Councillor Clark may be able to report on some of the goings on. The rest of our meeting was pretty well normal procedure, and that's all from me. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In terms of just local interactions, first, obviously, there's been a fair bit going on, and we've talked about that, Council, in this context tonight. The only other thing just to mention locally is the Walborough Wind Farm Community Fund, which now been going in its 13th year, has had a little bit of a change of emphasis and looking to do some higher end projects, and as such we'll be talking to Council fairly soon about some of those things in terms of the Walborough area. I've been fairly busy in my MAV role as usual in the sense of things, and the most pleasing one, of course, was to have everybody back together for the first time to have a state council since October of 2019. We were in the town hall at Melbourne. Of course, we didn't know a week later there was going to be a COVID outbreak, but thankfully that wasn't a hot spot, so we all got out of there and we weren't too hot, so that was good in that sense of things. As Councillor Vance said, I've been to a couple of events. The Rural Council Summit particularly was a good one. Given the impending restrictions, Mary Ann Brown, the chair, and the committee were very smart. They got all the good speakers from the 2 days and put them into 1 day, so she was fairly packed. But it was a very, very interesting event. So Bernard Salt, who has spoken to councils and a number of them, was probably the highlight of the day, talking about some of the demographic things. And the key thing that he pointed out to us was that we're actually all feeling this huge move of people from the country to the city, from the city to the country. And his analysis said that they're actually just the same amount of people moving. Every year would normally be 15,000 people would move out of Melbourne and come and live in the country. But every year we would normally have 10,000 people move out of the country and go to the city. But guess what? None of us out of the country are going to the city for hell or high water at the moment. So that's why we have the pressure we have. So that's a quite interesting thing. So it's not more city people. It's actually just the fact that we're staying put and everyone else is coming to join us, which is a really nice thing in that sense. Some of the project work of RCV is really important, and I know council does in terms of follow that through and use it as appropriate in those sorts of things. A number of those projects were also discussed on the day. So that's all from me. Thank you, Mr Mayor. That was, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, as well, I toured the Lexington Hub, and it's an impressive apparatus coming together. It'll be wonderful for the town. Again, I toured the lockup in Moonabel, and I recommend to anyone who, like me, has driven through Moonabel on many, many occasions and has no idea that the lockup is there, no idea that the common is there, no idea what else is there in the common. It's a wonderful little area there. They've put in an awful lot of effort. Historically, it is very interesting to spend 10 or 15 minutes of your journey to drive in, have a look and understand what it was like back in the day when 3 children could suddenly be found walking the streets and end up in Ballarat in the Magistrates Court. It's an interesting story. The other major item in Avoca is that the Avoca Play Space has been opened this week, and to all reports, it's a wonderful addition to the Avoca area. Councillor Clark has taken the chief tester to the play space, and daughter Victoria has given it the thumbs up, which to me means we've done a wonderful job. The kids love it. The number of children you see around the town in there playing with parents sitting around on the local chairs and facilities, drinking coffee, having a chat, is absolutely fantastic. And hopefully it will be enjoyed for many, many years to come. Well done to all those involved in creating the play space and getting it up and running.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Like everyone else, I took a tour of the Lexington Hub, and you know, that's just a fantastic facility, and it's coming together really well now. And when you have a look at it there and you look across at the old facility, it's not really, you can't make any comparisons, but you know, certainly it was their time to get a new facility, and I'm sure, like us, they're all looking forward to when that actually opens. I think it's around about September, so we're all looking forward to that. It's a fantastic facility. Had a couple of Mayor and CEO meetings, and interestingly enough, but probably not surprising, you know, some of the things we've discussed tonight get discussed in those meetings, and the transmission line is one of those things. So that's the forum where some of those things get discussed, and, you know, it's been a fairly regular topic. So just for the members of the public, so they know, it is getting discussed at all different levels, and certainly across the councils, the neighbouring councils. So you're certainly being heard. We had some deliberative engagement sessions over at Lexington, and that was really interesting, and just a fantastic group of people came together and had some workshops over 3 weekends, and they gave up their time to do that, and they've come up with some very, very interesting ideas, and we look forward to working with that to see what we can do for our future plans. So that's really important. I attended the MOV State Council meeting, which of course David's the president of, and he did a fantastic job considering, I think there was 2 years worth of questions and resolutions to get through, because the previous year COVID, I think, had put a kibosh on it. So David did a fantastic job in keeping it moving, and it was very good. So well done, David. We should be proud of you. Probably the only other thing I'd like to finish off with is, you know, we've gone through some COVID restrictions again, and we've seen some of those restrictions eased. But I just really want to congratulate the community on their continued resilience and patience with all these things, and their adherence across our municipality to the restrictions. It's difficult. It's not easy to comply all the time, but, you know, the businesses, the people, the communities, the services have just been fantastic. So it's really worth congratulating you, and hang in there. We just hope that we're not going to go through another round of lockdowns, but time will tell. So they've just done a fantastic job. So that's about it for me. Thank you. So that takes us to item 15, the confidential items. So would someone like to move? Ron, seconder for that. Councillor Vance, all those in favour? Thank you. So we'll move into closed meeting time.